ever wonder why someone you love suddenly disappears? Not just physically, I'm talking about emotionally vanishing. One moment they're leaning in, sharing laughs, making memories, and the next they're ghosts, silent, distant, cold. You text and it's dry. You call and it goes unanswered. And your mind spirals, doesn't it? What did I do? Did I push too hard? Did they ever really care? But let me flip your entire perspective right now. When an avoidant attachment style disconnects, it's not rejection, it's emotional survival. You see, most people interpret distance as disinterest. But avoidance isn't about not caring. It's about caring so deeply that proximity becomes a threat. And that right there is the paradox. The more an avoidant feels, the more they retreat. Why? Because vulnerability has never been safe for them. At the root of avoidance is a childhood or a past where emotional closeness was unreliable, unpredictable, or even weaponized. So what do they learn? They learn to associate intimacy with pain, affection with abandonment, love with loss. And when someone like you walks into their life and starts showing them real connection, their nervous system panics. It's not that they're trying to hurt you. It's that their mind is screaming, this is dangerous. Don't get too close. You'll lose yourself. You'll get hurt again. So what do? They vanish. Now here's the part nobody talks about. While they're silent, they're not detached. They're overwhelmed. Their mind is looping through every interaction, overanalyzing every word, second-guessing their feelings, your intentions, their own worthiness. This is not calm detachment. This is emotional warfare fought behind a mask of indifference. This is where most people give up. They take the silence personally, walk away, and confirm the avoidant's deepest fear. If I let someone in, they'll leave. But listen, their disappearing act isn't about you. It's about their internal wiring, their default survival mechanism. That silence is their armor, their fortress. And ironically, the more they care, the thicker the walls get. Now, I'm not saying you should chase them. I'm not saying you should tolerate emotional unavailability forever. What I'm saying is learn to read the behavior accurately. Understand the psychology. Because when an avoidant pulls back after real connection, it often means you hit a nerve they've kept hidden for years. They're not pushing you away because they don't love you. They're pushing you away because they do. And love feels unsafe. You got to stop measuring love by the presence of closeness and start recognizing love in the resistance to closeness. That's where it hides with avoidance. That's where it gets camouflaged behind their need for space, their inconsistency, their confusing silence. Now, does that make it okay? No. But does it make it understandable? Absolutely. And when you can understand something, you gain power. You stop taking it personally. You stop begging for crumbs. You stop internalizing someone else's trauma as your failure. Because sometimes love doesn't say, I miss you with words. Sometimes love screams it through distance. And if you're the one they run from, it might just mean you're the one that matters most. Let that sink in. Let's talk about something most people never recognize until it's too late. The quiet watcher. The one who doesn't reach out, doesn't confess their feelings, doesn't beg for you back, but still hasn't stopped thinking about you. Ever. Did you think they'd move on because they don't say a word? But what if I told you that when an avoidant attachment style truly loves someone, they often love in silence, from the shadows. This isn't some cliche romantic drama. It's a very real psychological pattern rooted in deep emotional conflict. You have to understand, avoidants are driven by a core belief that vulnerability equals danger. So when they fall for someone, it activates the very part of them they've spent years trying to keep dormant. They don't know how to process that level of emotional charge without it feeling like a threat to their autonomy, their identity, their safety. So what do they do instead of facing it? They observe. They check your stories. They scroll through your pictures. They remember your words, your habits, your scent, not because they're obsessed, but because that's the safest way for them to feel close without actually being close. It's easier for an avoidant to monitor you than to connect with you. Why? Because observing gives them the illusion of control. Connection to them feels like surrender. And if they've ever been hurt by a parent, a partner, even themselves, surrender is terrifying. It represents the possibility of being seen and rejected, of giving everything and still being left. So they choose distance over disclosure, silence over sincerity. But don't confuse silence with indifference. That's where most people get it wrong. An avoidant may ignore your texts, but revisit your profile 10 times a day. They might not respond to your vulnerability, but they'll analyze it for hours afterward. They may not say, "I miss you," but the moment you pull your energy away, their world feels a little less safe, a little less grounded. Why? Because you mattered. You still matter. But they don't know how to approach that without losing themselves in it. And here's where it gets deep. Love for an avoidance isn't just about wanting someone. It's about fearing what that want will expose. It's not the feeling itself they run from. It's what the feeling demands. Vulnerability, surrender, change. So they choose the shadows, the distance, the illusion of detachment. But in reality, they are often more emotionally activated than the person who is openly grieving or obsessing. They're just trained by trauma to keep it hidden. Now, I want you to think about this from a philosophical lens. Is love real if it's never expressed? Can someone love you without telling you, without texting you, without showing up? Yes, but it's a broken kind of love. It's love trapped behind emotional armor. It's love that never got the skills to express itself in healthy, secure ways. And while it might feel noble to wait for that love to wake up, remember this. You're not here to be studied. You're here to be loved in the open. If you're being watched but not reached for, you have to ask yourself, is this love enough for the life I want to build? Because yes, when an avoidant loves you, they often love you in silence. But love that stays hidden is just potential, never a partnership. And potential doesn't build futures. It only builds illusions. Let's get real about something. Most people completely misunderstand the emotional roller coaster of the push-pull dynamic with an avoidant. 1 minute they're close, affectionate, almost intoxicating. The next, they're cold, withdrawn, and unreachable. You're left spinning, confused, and doubting everything that just happened. Now here's what you need to know. That dynamic isn't just emotional chaos. It's a deep psychological pattern born from unresolved trauma. When an avoidant starts pulling away, after pulling you in, they're not trying to control you. They're trying to protect themselves. And ironically, the push-pull is often the loudest cry for emotional safety they don't know how to ask for. See, avoidance isn't rooted in indifference. It's rooted in fear, a fear that gets activated the moment they start feeling real connection. To most avoidants, love isn't comforting, it's dangerous. And when that closeness gets too intense, when they start catching feelings that feel bigger than their emotional bandwidth, their instinct is to escape. But what makes this so disorienting for you is that you felt the depth, you saw the softness, you caught a glimpse of the part of them they hide from the world, and then suddenly, it's gone. Vanished. Like it never happened. And that's when the mind starts playing tricks on you. Did I imagine it? Was it fake? Did they use me? But here's the brutal truth most people don't want to hear. They weren't faking it. In fact, they were being more real with you than they've been with almost anyone. But they weren't emotionally equipped to sustain that level of openness. So they ran. Not because you were wrong for them, but because you were right. Let that sink in. You became the mirror they couldn't avoid. You triggered the parts of themselves they haven't healed, and instead of processing that, they reacted the only way they know how, by pushing you away to survive. Now, this doesn't make the behavior acceptable. It doesn't mean you should tolerate emotional whiplash forever, but it does mean you need to understand the terrain you're walking through. Because when you start to see that avoidance push and pull, not to manipulate, but to manage emotional threat, you stop taking it personally. And that gives you power. Here's the deeper philosophical layer. Love, when it's not integrated with self-awareness, becomes a battlefield. And the avoidant is often at war with themselves. One part wants connection, the other part sees it as a trap. And that war plays out in real time with you as the collateral damage. They'll give just enough to pull you in, then disappear when they feel exposed. Not because they're cruel, but because closeness to them feels like vulnerability. And vulnerability to them feels like annihilation. So if you're stuck in that cycle, waiting for clarity, begging for consistency, hoping they'll finally choose closeness, understand this, they do care, but caring and capacity are not the same thing. Their love is real, but if they haven't done the inner work, their fear will always speak louder than their affection. That's the tragedy of the avoidant. They love deeply, but that love gets buried under survival instincts. And if you don't know what you're looking at, you'll mistake their retreat for rejection, when in fact it's a panic response, a malfunction in their emotional software. So don't chase what keeps running. Don't shrink just to avoid triggering someone's fear of closeness. Because the moment you start rescuing someone from their emotional patterns, you risk abandoning yourself. And no love, no matter how real, is worth losing yourself for. Let's break one of the biggest myths people hold about avoidance. That when they set boundaries, they're trying to push you away for good. That couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, in the world of avoidance, setting boundaries is one of the deepest signs of emotional investment, not detachment. Here's what most people miss. Avoidants aren't naturally good at communicating their needs. They're wired to handle everything on their own. They were conditioned somewhere along the line to believe that emotional self-containment is the only path to safety. Vulnerability? That's a luxury they were never taught to afford. So when someone like you starts getting close, when emotional intimacy starts creeping in, it activates every survival alarm in their system. Now, early on in the connection, an avoidant won't say anything. They'll smile, they'll go along, they'll engage on the surface, but internally, they're scanning for threats. Not threats from you as a person, but from what connection represents. unpredictability, exposure, the possibility of getting hurt. So what happens when the connection deepens? It hit a fork in the road. One path is their usual route: ghosting, retreat, shutting down, disappearing without explanation. That's the easy route for them. That's the comfortable dysfunction. But every now and then, when the connection feels different, when it matters, they take the harder road. The road that risks discomfort. The road where they actually say, hey, I need space. Or, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. And that right there is massive. Because for an avoidant to express a boundary isn't a rejection of the relationship. It's a sign that they're trying to preserve it. Think about that. They're making an effort to communicate rather than escape. They're staying in the ring instead of vanishing into silence. That is growth. That is progress. That is love trying to operate through fear. It might not look romantic. It might not come with flowers and grand declarations, but it's real and it's hard won. But you have to be careful here. This is where a lot of people sabotage the dynamic. They take the boundary personally. They hear I need space and translate it as I don't care about you. They hear I need time and translate it as you're not enough. And they react from their wounds instead of responding with understanding. But if you zoom out, what's really happening is this. Someone who spent their life avoiding intimacy is telling you, in the only language they know, I want this to work, but I need to do it at a pace I can psychologically handle. That's not weakness, that's courage in slow motion. And it doesn't mean you have to wait forever. It doesn't mean you compromise your standards. But it does mean that if someone who's afraid of closeness starts trying to communicate, even imperfectly, you're witnessing transformation in real time. From a psychological standpoint, boundaries are a sign of internal conflict being managed consciously. Instead of defaulting to their trauma, they're trying to regulate their nervous system in the presence of love. That is no small thing. Philosophically, what we're talking about here is the shift from self-protection to self-awareness. It's the avoidant beginning to step out of their story of isolation and into a new narrative, one where connection and individuality can coexist. That's love doing the hard work, not the pretty work, the real work. So the next time an avoidant sets a boundary, don't automatically see it as a wall. Look again. It might just be a door they've never dared to open before. And if you're on the other side of that door, the question becomes, do you have the clarity to recognize emotional progress even when it's dressed in discomfort? Because sometimes the quiet effort to stay is louder than all the ways they used to lead. Let's talk about something that often goes unnoticed in avoidant behavior. When they start doing small, subtle acts of care that they never announce, never draw attention to, and never explain. These aren't the grand romantic gestures you see in movies. These are the quiet moments of consideration. The text to make sure you got home safe. The unspoken support when you're overwhelmed. The way they remember the one thing you said in passing 2 months ago. These small acts are everything. See, avoidants struggle to say I love you in words because words make them feel exposed. They were likely raised in environments where emotional expression was discouraged, ridiculed, or straight up ignored. So love, for them, has to find another outlet. Action. Small, seemingly insignificant actions become the only safe expression of what's actually a very intense emotional experience underneath. But here's the catch. If you're not paying attention, you'll miss it. You'll miss the way they adjusted their schedule for you but never mentioned it. You'll miss the fact that they researched something you were interested in just to feel more connected. You'll miss how they showed up when it mattered, even if they didn't show up how you expected them to. And when we miss it, we assume the worst. We assume they don't care, that they're disconnected, that we're alone in the relationship. But here's the truth. Avoidants aren't wired for performative affection. They're wired for functional love. They feel safer showing love through doing than through declaring. That's not because they're cold. It's because emotional vulnerability for them is a battlefield of past pain. They've learned to communicate value not through emotional intensity, but through usefulness, through presence, through the little things. Psychologically, this traces back to a survival-based adaptation. If I can't show love emotionally, I'll show it practically. If I can't say how I feel, I'll fix, do, help, support. That becomes their version of intimacy. And until that fear of emotional exposure is healed, their love will always be delivered in coded behavior instead of clear communication. The philosophical layer of this is fascinating. It speaks to a deeper question. What is love if it's never declared but consistently demonstrated? Can we learn to recognize love in the mundane instead of just the dramatic? The problem is, we've been conditioned to look for lightning bolts, not slow-burning fires. But in real relationships, especially with avoidance, it's the slow-burning fire that's actually the most stable, the most committed, and the most authentic. But let's not romanticize emotional avoidance. You still deserve verbal reassurance. You still deserve clarity. The goal isn't to settle for breadcrumbs. It's to learn how to read the emotional language the avoidant speaks while holding space for the love you actually need. That balance is key. Because here's the reality. Many avoidants love you in ways they don't know how to say. They feel the depth. They feel the attachment. But their fear hijacks their expression. So they revert to what's safe, acts of service, logistical help, protection, subtle support. And sometimes that is their version of I love you. So if you're constantly waiting for the dramatic confession, you'll overlook the quiet effort. If you're always measuring love by how it looks on the outside, you'll miss how deeply it's operating in silence. But don't just interpret their small acts of love. Challenge them to grow into fuller expressions of it. Hold them accountable with compassion. Invite them into a deeper emotional space without demanding perfection. Because true love doesn't just accept someone's language, it teaches them a new one. And if they're willing to learn, that's when small acts of care evolve into transformational love. So the next time you see them do something small that whispers, I care, don't ignore it. That might just be the loudest love they've ever spoken. Let's finish this with something few people recognize, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. When an avoidant starts showing emotional conflict, it's not a red flag. It's not a glitch in the system. It's a signal. A signal that love is present. And it's starting to challenge their emotional programming. When they're confused, hot and cold, torn between pulling you close and pushing you away, that's the battlefield where love is trying to win over fear. Here's what you need to understand. Emotional conflict and avoidance doesn't mean they don't care. It means they care so much that they've activated a war within themselves. A part of them wants to open up, to stay, to connect. But another part, the part built from years of learned self-protection, wants to shut down, disappear, and preserve the illusion of control. That contradiction is not a weakness. It's the very evidence that you're touching something real in them, something vulnerable, something they don't allow just anyone to see. This is where most people get it wrong. They take the emotional confusion as a personal insult. If he really loved me, he wouldn't act like this. But love, especially for someone avoidant, isn't always clean. It's messy. It's raw. It forces old walls to crack, and when those walls start crumbling, don't be surprised if they panic. Because what's falling apart for them isn't just a defense mechanism, it's an identity they've clung to for emotional safety. Psychologically, this is what we call a disorganized attachment moment. It's when the nervous system is firing on all cylinders saying, I want connection, but I don't trust it. And when an avoidant hits that moment, they'll often say one thing and do another. They'll show up with intensity and then vanish for a week. They'll make future plans and then retreat in silence. That's not games. That's internal dissonance, attachment pain, surfacing for the first time in a long time. But the question isn't why are they confused? The question is, what is their confusion revealing? It's revealing that they're at their edge. And being at the edge is everything in transformation. That emotional tug of war is the place where real growth happens. If they don't run from it, if they lean in, if they choose courage over comfort. But here's the truth, not all of them will. And that's where your power comes in. You are not here to rescue them. You're not here to stabilize their chaos. You are here to observe the pattern and make a decision. Can they meet you where you are, or are they still at war with themselves? And you must be brutally honest with that answer. Philosophically, what we're witnessing in this emotional conflict is the human struggle between the known and the unknown. The known is the avoidance comfort zone. Control, independence, self-reliance. The unknown, that's love, that's surrender, that's risking the very thing they swore they'd never do again, needing someone. To the avoidant feels like danger. So when you see them wrestling with closeness, don't jump to judgment, but also don't abandon your standards. Meet them with empathy, but stay rooted in clarity. Because love without direction becomes chaos, and chaos will keep you spinning until you forget your own worth.